It was early morning in Brussels, the sky just beginning to lighten as I sat at the desk in my hotel room, finalizing some paperwork for the warehouse acquisition. I had barely settled in, the weight of a long week pressing against my shoulders, when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "George?" Vanessa's voice crackled through the line, colder than I remembered. "I'm divorcing you." I froze, the words hanging in the air, too surreal to fully comprehend. My heart skipped, not in shock but in something else, something deeper. A part of me had known, hadn't I? The distance, the coldness, the late nights when she came home late without a word. It was all too much, too familiar, but hearing her say it out loud, divorce, felt like a slap in the face. "And I've already sold the beach house," she continued, her voice oddly matter-of-fact. "I'm starting over with Kyle." Kyle. Her personal trainer. Of course it was him. A man who couldn't even afford the car he drove but somehow found a way into my life, my marriage, and now my home. The words hit harder than the betrayal itself. She didn't pause, not even for a breath. "I just wanted you to know. I'll be fine. We both will." I swallowed, trying to steady the pulse that thudded in my ears. "When did you close the sale?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. I had to. I couldn't let her see me break, not now. Not when I had no idea what else she'd done. "Yesterday," she said, almost sounding disappointed by my calm response. "The buyer's moving in next week. I figured you wouldn't mind staying at the Marriott when you get back. You're always on the road anyway." I felt like I was sinking, but I stayed still, the silence stretching between us. She had already made her decision. The house, the life we built, all gone, and here I was 6,000 miles away, unable to do a thing about it. With a sigh, she ended the call, and I was left staring at the Brussels skyline through the window, the weight of her betrayal settling in my chest like a stone. What had I missed? How had I let this happen? For the first time in years, I felt the sting of everything slipping away piece by piece. But I wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. Not without a fight. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen in front of me, though I couldn't make sense of the words on it anymore. My mind wasn't on the acquisition details. It was miles away, somewhere back home, where Vanessa's cold, final words still echoed in my head. I knew how to keep my composure. I'd spent decades negotiating multimillion-dollar deals, navigating high-stakes contracts with people who would sell their own mothers for a good deal. I was good at it, patient, precise, meticulous. I could sit in a room full of sharks, never flinch, never give away an inch of ground. But this was different. This wasn't about business. This was my life, my marriage. The calm I showed on the phone was only skin deep. Inside, I was unraveling, but I kept my face unreadable. I couldn't let anyone see it. I wouldn't let her see it. Not yet. I thought back to when Vanessa and I first met. It seemed like another lifetime ago, when everything felt so sure. Back then, I was focused on building my career, rising in the property world, securing contracts that nobody else could touch. She was ambitious too. I admired her drive, her intelligence, the way she could talk circles around anyone in a room. She was confident, sharp. We were a perfect match, at least I thought we were. But somewhere along the way something had shifted. The late nights in the office, the constant travel, none of it mattered to her anymore. She'd stopped asking about my work, stopped caring about the things I spent my life building. I was so caught up in the deals, the properties, the contracts, that I failed to notice what was happening at home. How had I let this happen? I looked out the window, the rain tapping against the glass, a cold reminder that I couldn't control everything. Even my best-laid plans, my professional success, had failed to protect the most important thing, my family. And now, I was left picking up the pieces, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Vanessa's voice came through the phone, colder than before, but with an air of finality. She spoke as though she were reading a script, her tone confident, almost dismissive of any emotion I might have left. "I've already signed the papers," she said, her words sharp, clipped. "The beach house sold for a nice price. The buyer's moving in next week. I thought you'd be fine staying at the Marriott when you get back. It's always been your second home, right?" I felt a tightness in my chest. The beach house. Our house. She was just done. The fact that she sold it without even discussing it with me after everything we had built together, it didn't sit right. Not just because of the betrayal, but because of the way she dismissed it all. It was as if our entire life together was nothing but a property deal to her. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how she saw it. But something about her confidence, the way she spoke so matter-of-factly, started to nag at me. She made it sound simple, almost too simple. The sale had already happened, yet she hadn't once mentioned the trust or the legal ownership of the property. Not that I expected her to know the intricacies of property law, but I knew better than to just accept things at face value. My experience in real estate negotiations, my decades of protecting clients from bad deals, kicked in. I had made sure the beach house was in a living trust years ago, an ironclad move to protect the property and to protect us. I had to be sure, so I made a mental note to check the paperwork when I could. The pieces weren't lining up. Vanessa wasn't as in control as she thought she was. There was something bigger at play here, something she hadn't accounted for. And if she thought I'd just let her walk away with everything, she was gravely mistaken. As I sat there in the quiet of my hotel room, my mind drifted back over the past few years, replaying the small, seemingly insignificant moments that I had brushed off at the time. Vanessa's behavior had always been subtle, but consistent, gradually pulling away, retreating into her own world while I was left in the dark. She'd stopped asking about my work, stopped being interested in the small things that once connected us. I noticed the changes in her phone habits, how her texts went from warm and affectionate to brief, impersonal check-ins. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just the result of our busy lives. But over time, those little things added up. There were unexplained expenses on our credit card, dinners I wasn't a part of, weekend retreats with friends I'd never met. I hadn't confronted her. I never resorted to tracking her or hiring private investigators like some of my colleagues had. That wasn't my style. I chose to observe, to watch and listen, and over time the puzzle pieces started to fit together in a way that made sense. Something wasn't right. And now, sitting here with the reality of her betrayal hanging over me, I felt the full weight of it. I had trusted her. I had built a life with her. But the truth was becoming clearer with each passing minute. I had been blind to her motives. She was no longer the woman I had married. She had turned into someone else, someone who had her own agenda, and I had been the fool who didn't see it until now. But this wasn't just about her deceit. It was about me too. About how I'd failed to protect myself, to protect us. And now I was ready to fix it. I wasn't going to let her walk away without facing the consequences of her actions. I wasn't going to let her take what I had worked so hard for. I would fight for what was mine, and I would do it with the same precision and strategy that had made me successful in my career. This was no longer just about a marriage falling apart. It was about reclaiming control. I sat at the desk, the documents spread out in front of me, my hands steady as I flipped through the pages. I had to make sure of everything, check and double check. My mind was focused, calculating. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about something deeper, something more personal. I pulled out the property deed, the one that had been buried in a pile of refinancing papers for our investment property in Tampa. My attorney had drawn up the trust years ago, and I had never imagined I'd need it like this. But here it was, right in front of me, proof. The deed showed the Amelia Island property was held in the George Whitaker Living Trust, with me as the sole trustee. Vanessa had signed everything without even reading it, too distracted by her phone to notice the fine print. She had no legal claim to the property. Not anymore. I leaned back in the chair, a quiet satisfaction settling over me. All the years of meticulous contract review, all the hours spent poring over details that others missed. This was the payoff. The slow, strategic move I had made without her even realizing it. She had never questioned the trust, never asked to understand the intricacies of it. And now it was my shield. She couldn't sell what she didn't own. And the buyer, whoever they were, had no legal claim to the house. The sale was fraudulent, and that changed everything. It wasn't just a matter of protecting my assets. It was about holding her accountable for the mess she had created, for trying to take what wasn't hers. I wasn't going to let this slide. The legal battle was about to begin, and I wasn't backing down. I drove the 40 minutes to Amelia Island in silence, my mind clear but my emotions simmering just beneath the surface. When I arrived, the Mercedes I didn't recognize was parked in my spot. Kyle, no doubt. I wasn't surprised. The front door was unlocked, an open invitation into a home that was no longer mine in any meaningful sense. I could hear their voices, Vanessa's laugh, Kyle's low murmur, coming from the kitchen. They were talking about renovations, planning changes to a place that used to be our home. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle in. I stepped inside, my suitcase making no sound as I set it down. As soon as I entered the living room, they both looked up. Vanessa's smile faltered for a brief second, before she forced it back into place. "George," she said, her voice tight with surprise though not quite fear. "I didn't expect you back until Monday." "Clearly," I replied, my voice cool. My eyes flicked to Kyle, who stood by her, his arm around her waist. He quickly removed it, but it didn't escape my notice. "This is awkward," Kyle said, trying to chuckle but failing miserably. "I should probably go." "Actually," I said, cutting him off, "I'd prefer if you stayed. This concerns you too, apparently." Vanessa's eyes hardened. "We don't need to make this difficult, George," she snapped. "I've been unhappy for a long time. We both deserve a fresh start." I nodded, still calm. "I agree completely," I said, my voice unwavering. "Which is why I've already spoken to my attorney about the fraudulent property sale you attempted." Her face drained of color as her shock set in, and I watched her carefully. This was the moment she realized everything had shifted. The room felt colder, the air heavier. Kyle's earlier bravado dissolved into unease, his fidgeting telling the story of someone who realized they were in far deeper than they'd thought. Vanessa's shock turned into disbelief as I placed the trust documents on the counter. "The beach house isn't yours to sell, Vanessa. It hasn't been for almost a year." She snatched the papers from my hand, her eyes scanning them frantically, searching for a way out. "This isn't possible," she whispered, her voice trembling. I remained composed. "Not only is it possible, it's legally binding. The sale you initiated is null and void. The buyer has already been notified." Kyle, looking completely deflated now, glanced at Vanessa. "You said the sale was final," he muttered, more to her than to me. "It was," Vanessa insisted, but the uncertainty in her voice gave her away. I met her gaze. "Check the deed," I said, my voice steady. "The property is owned by the George Whitaker Living Trust. You signed the transfer papers last May. Remember those refinancing documents you didn't bother to read?" The reality of it hit her, and she stood frozen for a moment, her eyes wide, as if she were seeing everything she had planned slipping through her fingers. The tension in the room was palpable, but I couldn't afford to feel anything but cold clarity. Vanessa's face, once pale with shock, quickly twisted into something more dangerous, rage. She slammed the papers back onto the counter, her eyes blazing with fury. "You tricked me," she spat, her voice rising. "You set this up from the start. This isn't fair." I stood there, unwavering. The anger in her voice didn't move me. What she didn't seem to understand was that her rage didn't change the facts. It didn't change the trust or the paperwork. It didn't change the reality that she had crossed a line. I had let her manipulate me for years, but that ended now. Her voice softened, attempting a different approach. "George, we don't need to make this difficult. We can just split the proceeds from the sale. We can settle this amicably, no lawyers, no mess. I'll walk away and you can keep the house. What do you say?" It was the kind of offer she thought would solve everything, a quick fix to her betrayal. She wanted to avoid the consequences, wanted to salvage whatever she could from the wreckage she had created. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. I looked at her, my heart still aching, but a strange calmness settling over me. "No," I said, my voice firm. "You don't get to walk away without facing the consequences of what you've done. Not after everything." Her expression hardened, but I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who no longer cowered in the face of her manipulation. She was used to me placating her, smoothing things over, trying to make it work. But that was the old George, the one who thought love and patience could solve everything. Now I saw things clearly. This wasn't about salvaging a broken marriage, it was about justice. It was about standing up for what was mine, for everything I had worked for, and for the future I deserved. You made your choices, Vanessa, I continued, my voice calm, yet full of conviction. Now you'll have to live with them. She glared at me, but I didn't flinch. I had made my peace. This wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness, about holding her accountable for the mess she had created. And I wasn't going to let her walk away without paying the price. The quiet hum of the office was interrupted by the sound of the folder being slid across the desk. Brian's voice, steady but serious, filled the silence. There's more, he said, his eyes locked on mine as he pushed the file toward me. I hesitated for only a moment before opening it. Inside, I found bank statements, credit card receipts, and property records I had never seen before. I scanned through them quickly, my breath catching in my throat as I pieced everything together. Vanessa had been busy. Too busy. She'd opened a separate account last year, siphoning off over $170,000 from our joint savings. My stomach tightened. That was our emergency fund. The money we'd set aside for our future, for security. And now it was gone, funneled into an account I knew nothing about. I pushed the papers aside, my mind racing. This wasn't an impulse. This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated. Planned. Vanessa had taken money we both worked for, and for what? To fund her new life with Kyle? Brian slid another document across the table. This one was a lease for a retail space in Savannah, signed just 3 months ago. It was in both Vanessa's name and Kyle's. They were opening a fitness boutique together, and I hadn't even known it was in the works. My thoughts spiraled. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind to the reality of what she was doing behind my back? She hadn't just fallen for someone else, she had been planning this business, this new future with Kyle, using funds that should have been ours. Funds she had stolen, with the intent of starting a new life on her terms, and without any regard for what she was leaving behind. It hit me with the weight of a sledgehammer. Vanessa hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, this was a financial betrayal too. She had played me for a fool, and for the first time I saw her for what she truly was. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, had been plotting her escape for months, maybe even longer. It wasn't just a divorce, it was a well-calculated move to secure a future that didn't include me. I sat back in the chair, my hands gripping the edges of the desk. The anger I'd been holding back surged, but so did something else, something colder, more precise. She had underestimated me, thought she could get away with it. But now I understood the depth of her deception. Now I was ready to fight back. I sat across from Brian, my attorney, in his office, the weight of the last few days pressing heavily on me. The documents I had gathered, the bank statements, the fraudulent lease, the trust deed, were spread out before us like a map of Vanessa's deceit. This wasn't going to be a clean, easy resolution. I had known that from the start. But now it was about protecting what I had left, ensuring that what Vanessa had tried to take couldn't be ripped away without consequence. George, Brian began, his voice steady, legally you're in a strong position. The trust is ironclad. We can ensure that the house stays in your name and that no further transfers happen. I'll notify the title companies and the county recorder's office to make sure nothing else slips through the cracks. I nodded, feeling the familiar calmness of a negotiation taking hold. The legal process was never simple, but it was my world. I knew how to move through it, how to make sure my assets were protected. But this wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about the money. The $170,000 Vanessa had siphoned off from our joint savings, the money she had used for her new business venture with Kyle. It was harder to stomach than the house. It was harder because it had been our security, our future. And she had stolen it, all while pretending everything was fine. Now, Brian continued, pulling out another document, there's the matter of the misappropriated funds. She took that money for her new business, for her fresh start with Kyle. We can go after her for that too, but we need to decide if that's the route we want to take. I leaned back in my chair, considering it. Going after Vanessa for the money was the right thing to do. But part of me didn't want to drag this out any further than I had to. I wanted to resolve this, to move forward. But I couldn't let her get away with it either. We'll pursue it, I said, my voice firm. We'll make sure she returns the funds and relinquishes any claim to the beach house. But I don't want her in jail. This is about justice, not punishment." Brian nodded, understanding. "Agreed. I'll have the settlement offer drafted. We'll give her 48 hours to accept, and if she refuses, we proceed with legal action." As I left Brian's office, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction that came with winning, because nothing about this felt like a win. But it was something. It was the peace that comes from knowing you've done everything you can to protect what's yours. Vanessa had made her choices, and now I would make mine. I would stand my ground. And if that meant fighting in court, then so be it. The damage wasn't fully repaired, and it never would be. But for the first time since I'd gotten that call in Brussels, I felt like I was in control again. And that, at least, gave me some peace. 6 months had passed since everything had shattered. The house, the beach house, was mine again, legally protected, secured, and now renovated. The kitchen was updated, the siding replaced with something sturdier, and the windows were hurricane-proof. It no longer felt like the place I had once shared with Vanessa. It felt like mine. A quiet achievement, a step toward moving on, even though the emotional scars still lingered. I stood on the deck, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic. The ocean was steady, unwavering, just like it had always been. The waves rolled in, predictable, constant, a reminder of the stability I was working hard to create in my own life. But there was something about that steadiness that felt different now. It didn't offer the comfort it once had. I had always believed that if I could make the right decisions, control the right things, I could hold on to what mattered. But I couldn't control everything. And I had learned that the hard way. Through mutual friends, I had heard about Vanessa and Kyle. They'd opened their fitness studio in Savannah, though it was on a much smaller scale than they'd originally planned. I heard their business was struggling, but I felt no satisfaction in that. No joy in seeing her face difficulties. I had been angry at first, angry that she had betrayed me, angry at the way she had gone about everything, but the anger had faded over time, replaced by something quieter. A sense of finality. I wasn't glad she was struggling. In some way, I still wished things had turned out differently. I still wondered what could have been if she hadn't made the choices she did. But that wasn't my life anymore. It wasn't my future. The divorce was final. The settlement had been fair, though it had left a mark. Vanessa had returned the agreed-upon funds, and I had invested it in a commercial property downtown. Small, stable, reliable. Something that would provide a steady income. Something that, unlike my marriage, wouldn't suddenly vanish without warning. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen for a moment before I decided to call Monica, my title agent. She had been a quiet supporter through all of this, always offering advice when I needed it. "How's the beach house?" she asked when she answered. "Better every day," I replied, my voice even. "Thanks again for your help with the trust setup. It worked out exactly as we planned." She laughed softly. "Of course, George. That's what friends are for." There was a pause before she added, "Actually, I'm calling because I found another investment property that might interest you." I smiled as I listened, the weight of the past months lifting off me for a moment. Maybe it wasn't over, this journey of rebuilding my life. Maybe it was just beginning.